Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. My dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is our second session in the Islamic speech class. We had one session last week, and inshallah we'll be continuing this week and the following weeks. As I mentioned earlier, that our our classes will be divided into two main parts. The first part, which we are undertaking right now, focuses mainly on theory, if you will, how to conduct a good presentation, qualities needed for the good speaker to possess, and tips for dynamic speaking. And then the second part, which starts inshallah maybe a month or so, we will be conducting practical lessons, meaning we'll be asking the student to prepare each for 5-minute speech on a specific topic that I will select. And obviously I'm going to give you guidelines on how to prepare for your speech. I'm going to help you basically with preparing for your speech as far as content, resources, and so on and so forth. And then the entire class with the instructor will be critiquing your speech. Don't be intimidated by the word critiquing, because that doesn't mean at all that you're not supposed to make any mistake when you give a speech. Obviously, we all make mistakes. We're not going to expect you to give a perfect speech from day one, but basically we will help you. We will guide you through how to better yourself in advancing in your talent as a public speaker, especially as an Islamic speaker. So, last week we mentioned that there are 3 qualities needed for the speakers. 3 major qualities. 3 major qualities. We mentioned one last week, and this week I will be addressing the other 2 major qualities. The first quality I talked about last week in depth, and that is self-confidence. You should have self-confidence. How to have self-confidence? We said there are 2 things you need to do. One, if you are afraid of speaking, when you're afraid of speaking, how to enhance your self-confidence? We said Imam Ali alayhi salam gave a tip, and the tip is if you are afraid of something, just do it. إِذَا خِفْتَ مِنْ شَيْءٍ فَقَعْ فِيهِ. Just do it. So the only way to break your fear and your phobia for speaking is by speaking. By practicing. And also, we mentioned that the repetition of speaking will help you a lot. Meaning, every time you go to the stage, your fear, your phobia will be less and less. So it depends on how much you're willing to practice. If you practice a lot, then you will have less phobia, less fear. If you practice less, you will have more phobia and less self-confidence. So the road for self-confidence is basically in just doing what you are afraid of doing, which is deciding to speak, forcing yourself to speak, and number 2, by keep practicing and keep doing and enhancing in your basically polishing your talent. Every person has that talent. Every person. As I said before, no one comes to this world as a talented speaker. No one. We all learn how to progress, how to improve. We all learn. Nobody comes as a perfect speaker, as a perfect engineer, as a perfect doctor. We all learn and we develop those, talents in us to become a better doctor or a better speaker or anything you want by practicing more. Number 2, today I want to talk about another quality that you all need to consider once you are considering becoming a public speaker. And that is being dynamic. There are two types of speakers. One, monotone, who can put you to sleep, and boring, basically. You don't want to be that boring speaker, do you? I don't think any of you would like to be a boring speaker. Rather, you want to be an engaging speaker, someone who engages his audience, not to put them to sleep. So, how to be a dynamic speaker? Obviously, this is something that goes back to you. Again, things and goals are not achieved by wishing them. Rather, they are achieved by wanting them and working to translate them into a reality. When you want something, you translate your will into an action. But if you just wish something without working on translating your wish into a reality, nothing will happen. Nothing will change. So, if you want to be a dynamic speaker, you have to work toward that goal. You have to work. Now, there are speakers who read with no emotion. And remember last week I mentioned some speakers who use the paper, who read from the paper. I said, if someone reads from paper, unless you have to, you're in the United Nations, you don't want to goof, you don't want to make a mistake, then you have to read from paper. But basically, if you are if you want to become a popular Muslim speaker, Islamic speaker, you're not going to read from paper. You have to read from heart. Now, remember we said if you keep reading from the paper every time, eventually, Assalamu alaikum, Assalamu alaikum, eventually you will not be viewed as a powerful speaker. Rather you will be considered someone reading. Anybody can read. It doesn't require big talent to read. And you don't want to be someone reading your speech. You want to be someone who lives his speech. And I will explain to you the difference between reading your speech or living your speech. Reading your speech has no emotion, has no life. Basically, you are reading, just reading. What's the difference between you sitting on your table, on your desk now, and reading this book, or me taking part or paragraphs of this book and reading it on the podium to you? No difference. No difference at all. Maybe it takes a little bit more gut to stand on the podium and read, but basically you're reading, you're not giving a speech when you read from the paper. Being a dynamic speaker requires you put life into your speech. You put passion in it. You are passionate about your speech. You put life in it. You interact basically with your subject. You're not delivering only a message, rather you live the message. So for example, if you are supposed to talk about what? About gossip and how bad it is to gossip. Ghiba. You want to put some life into it, some passion into it. You want to show the audience that you are basically interacting with your topic. You are internalizing the message. You're not just delivering a message. You're not a mail person. The mail person will deliver the mail to you without knowing the content of the mail he delivered. He delivers and he leaves. You don't want to be a mail person. You want to be someone who is interacting, someone who basically acting, if you want to say. It's okay to act. Act, not to act. Rather, not for sake of acting, rather for delivering that message powerfully. Imagine when I deliver a message and I'm not being dynamic, with no emotions involved at all, when I am emotionally involved in my topic, you feel the emotion coming, then you will be more interested in what I'm talking about. So if I'm talking about gossip and I put some emotion in it, and I can show you my emotion, you will be more influenced by my speech compared to a situation where I'm just telling you how bad it is. Islam says gossip is haram and we're not supposed to gossip. So being dynamic, first you will catch the attention of the audience. You will engage them. Number two, you will influence them by your message. And number three, they can see that you not only deliver that message, but rather you live the message you're trying to deliver. There is a huge difference between delivering a message only or living the message. When I live the message, you will be more influenced, more keen toward accepting my message. Rather just telling you it's haram to gossip. So always focus on putting passion into your speech. And don't act monotone. Don't act you are reading and you are just trying to deliver a message you're supposed to deliver. No, live your message. Now, when we talk, we also, alaykum as-salam, we also need to use our faculty, especially our hands, our facial, language has to be part of it. Meaning that when I speak, I'm supposed to engage my entire body into my speech, not only my tongue. So when I talk, I need to make sure my hand also is helping me in delivering the message. My head, the way I turn my face, the way I raise my voice or I lower the volume of my voice would definitely help. When I'm talking about something emotional, I need to make sure that my voice is aligned with my message. Otherwise, if the tone of my voice is the same, I'm not going to have much. So, raising your voice or lowering your voice. When I'm telling a story, sometimes it requires me to lower my voice, and sometimes the story itself would require me to raise my voice. This will help a lot in delivering the message. Let me give you an example. When I am telling the story of a man who lost his son, and his son was sick for a few months, and he was the only son. And that's a real story that happened to one of the companions of the Prophet. So he stayed home taking care of the child because he was the only child he had. And then after a few months, as the child's health was deteriorating, the father's health was deteriorating as well. He was getting depressed because he would see his son dying before his eyes without being able to do anything. So he left everything. He basically abandoned going to work, and he stayed home tending to his son, his 1-year-old son. But then one day his wife tells him that, you know what, it's been a while that you have been not going anywhere, staying home, taking care of your child. why don't you go today to the masjid and pray behind the Prophet and ask the Prophet to pray for your son? Hopefully, inshallah, he will be okay. And the man listens to his wife. He goes to the masjid. He meets the Prophet. Upon finishing his prayer, he comes running home to check on his son. While he is gone, the child dies. She puts him on his bed. She covers him with a sheet. And she decides to prepare a meal for her husband. When the man comes home, the first thing he asks about his son. She wouldn't say much. All she says, he is salam alaikum. He is resting. He is resting. Now she didn't lie because the child was resting. We believe that when you die, from an Islamic point of view, death is not the end. Death, in fact, could be the beginning of another life, a better life. So the man thought that his son is sleeping. He ate, he enjoyed his meal, and then after he finished, she asked her husband a question about jewelry given to her by her neighbor. And the neighbor came today to ask for the jewelry. And she's asking her husband whether or not she should return the jewelry to the owner, to her neighbor. And the man, Abu Talha, was a great man. He was a trustworthy person. He was a conscientious person. And he was very devout Muslim. And he was, in fact, shocked for the fact that his wife was even asking him that question. He says, why are you asking me this question? She asked you to give her back her jewelry? Give it back to her. You don't even need my permission. It belongs to her. She says, you know, having enjoyed the jewelry for a few months, it's difficult for me to give her back. And Abu Talha is so shocked to hear that. He tells his wife, it's not even yours. It's not even yours. This belongs to her. Why you should be mad at your neighbor when she asks you to give her what belongs to her, not to you? And then the mother, the wise mother, made her point. She says, Abu Talha, will you be upset at your Lord if he takes back what belongs to him, not to you? Now, this is a story. But as you may have noticed, as I was telling you the story, my voice was going through stages, volumes. Sometimes I raise my voice, and sometimes I lower my voice. Sometimes the volume goes up, sometimes the volume comes down, based on the emotional situation of the father or the mother. When you are talking about, you know, how difficult it is for a father to lose his son, in this moment you need to respect the emotions of the parent, of the father and the mother. You need to often lower your voice. And when you want to emphasize a point that you're trying to introduce to the audience, you need to what? You need to raise the volume of your voice. So the volume of your voice, the harakat, your language, your body language would definitely help you. These are aids for you to participate, to utilize, to help you in delivering your message. This is what dynamic means. To use all emotions, all body language, and the volume of your voice. You need to be alert on where to raise your voice, raise the volume, where to lower it, where you can visibly show emotions as you are affected by the story you are telling. So basically, we all like and we gravitate to which kind of speakers? A dynamic speaker or a monotone? Dynamic speaker. So if you are given a choice to be a speaker, never ever be monotone. Always be what? Be dynamic. Make sure that you put emotion in it. You put life. You put your own passion in it. When you speak, me as a listener, as your audience, I can feel the emotions in your voice and in your delivery. Number 3, the third quality that we need to focus on is being eloquent. So what does eloquent mean, my dear brothers and sisters? Eloquent means that, first of all, you must have a formal, whether you speak Arabic or English, it doesn't matter. You have to have formal language. You have to have a good command of language. Don't use slang words. Don't use Warren Avenue language. Don't, use inappropriate words. I was told one of the speakers, Muslim speakers, Islamic speakers in New York, one time he was delivering a speech in New York, and all of a sudden he used the F word. You cannot do this. You cannot do this. You have to be very careful how to use your word. An Islamic speaker has to be a role model. Your language has to be clean, academic, and well understood by people. You don't need to use complicated terms that some people will take them time to understand, or they have to go and search for it in the dictionary. No. Use everyday language, easy language that every person understands. You don't need to use complicated terms to imply that you are a highly educated person. Sometimes I have noticed that some speakers, in order to give an impression that I'm highly educated, they use complicated terms or vocabulary. You don't need to use complicated terms or vocabulary. All you need to do is to use simple language, formal language that everybody understands. That's number 1 key for being eloquent. Use formal but simple language. Formal but simple. Don't use a slang because that's not formal. And don't use complicated vocabulary because that is not simple. That's complicated. So those are those conditions to use formal and simple vocabulary are very essential in delivering your message to people. The story says that one day a mother would tell her daughter to wait for the mother to pick her up at the Rasif. So the daughter would say, Inshallah, I will wait for you at the Rasif. But when she comes to pick her up, she wouldn't find her at the Rasif. So what is Rasif in Arabic? The sidewalk. So she keeps using the word Rasif. So the first day comes, she couldn't find her. She looks for her, she picks her up, and she goes home. Next day, she couldn't find her. Third day, fourth day, fifth day. So after 7 or 6 days, the mother was so frustrated with her daughter that she says, I have been telling you to wait for me at the Rasif to pick you up, and I don't find you at the Rasif. What's wrong with you? She says, Mom, I don't understand what Rasif means. Explain to me what Rasif means. Sometime you're talking about something and you're so passionate about it and you keep repeating it, and the audience or some of the audience don't even know what you're talking about. So you have to be very careful. When you talk to any audience, the audience should be familiar with the terms you use. Let me give you a personal experience. When sometime I go to non-Muslim settings, I speak to non-Muslim audience. For you who are all Muslims, you know the difference between Islam and Muslim, right? Islam is the religion, Muslim is the individual who embraces Islam. But believe it or not, to some non-Muslims, it's not that clear cut. They get confused over those two words, Islam and Muslim. And they think they are synonymous. They mean the same thing. Or they mean two different things, completely different. And it happened more than one time that I was approached by some non-Muslims who came to me after the lecture, and she said, actually she was a woman, and she says, Imam, I have a question. I said, what? She says, what's the difference between those two religions you mentioned in your speech? I said, what two religions? She says, Islam and Muslim, there are two religions. There are no two religions, because maybe I did not explain enough to the audience the difference between the word Muslim and the word Islam. So when you speak, try to use a type of language that's not confusing to your audience. Not confusing. Rather simple and easy to understand or to comprehend. Now, I suggest to you, my dear brothers and sisters, for example, I suggest to you that if you want to keep with the normal or formal language Americans speak, I would refer you to two sources. One that you read, the other one that you listen to. The one that you read, I advise you to read New York Times. New York Times, the newspaper. Read it. It teaches you the formal language of average educated American people. So the other one is to listen to NPR. If you happen to be in your car driving, listen to NPR. It also familiarizes you with the typical language that Americans use. So, talking about being eloquent. Use easy, use formal but easy language. Also, be relevant. Part of being eloquent is to be relevant. How? I'm invited to speak at a funeral. So what do you expect me to speak in a funeral? When I'm invited to speak at a funeral, when I'm presiding over a funeral, Maryam, so what's the subject, relevant subject to speak about? About death and life, about hereafter, right? About the day of judgment, about reckoning, about judgment, about good deeds, right? Isn't that the topic that's relevant? What if I talked about the importance of marriage in the funeral? Is that relevant? That's not relevant. That's not eloquent. Therefore, that's not eloquent. To speak about irrelevant topic, no matter how powerful your topic is, but there should be relevance between your topic and the event you are celebrating. So at the funerals, you're not supposed to talk about marriage or divorce. Rather, you talk about death and hereafter and akhirah and reckoning and so on and so forth. And vice versa. If you are invited to a wedding and they ask you to give a speech in the wedding as a Muslim speaker though. So you're supposed to talk about, for example, marriage in Islam. How Islam encourages marriage. How Islam makes it easy on Muslim individuals to get married. How Islam views the dowry, that it is not a price tag, rather it is a symbolic gesture made by the husband toward his wife. Imagine someone is invited to speak at a wedding ceremony, to speak, and instead of speaking about marriage, he speaks about death and how God may strike you any minute, even at the night of your wedding, and you may die. And how you may leave out of this hall, in the wedding hall, and a car may, slam you and you may die instantly. Or about making sure to write your will before you die. These are not the type of topics you deliver at a wedding setting. So, or to talk about the two angels who may approach you the night of your death, and they will interrogate you, and you go in depth on how they would come to you and how they will interrogate you. You have to be relevant. In order to be eloquent, you have to be relevant. You have to set the tone, and you have to deliver the message that is relevant to the topic you are delivering. Or, for example, during Ashura. During Ashura, I remember a few years ago when I was at ICA, a guy came and he insisted he wants to give a speech. And I don't know why he was insisting, because he wasn't supposed to be part of the schedule during the Ashura night. And when he was given chance to speak, he kept on talking about, trust me, he was talking about the economic crisis in Russia. Economic crisis in Russia? What does it have to do with Ashura? So I was really puzzled. When he finished, I asked him, what was that topic I thought you were going to talk about Imam Hussein, about his revolution, about lessons learned from his revolution. What was that topic you brought up? He says, Sayyid, I wrote an article in one of the local newspaper, and I wanted to share it with the audience. That's not eloquent. To speak about the economic crisis in Russia during Ashura time, when people are expecting you to talk about Imam Hussein, his revolution, his sacrifices, that's not relevant at all. You need to be relevant. And being relevant makes you eloquent. You have to choose the topic that is consistent to the event you are celebrating or talking about. Okay. So, any questions so far? Now, there are certain do's and certain don'ts. Let's start with the do's. Number one. There are certain do's and certain don'ts when you're about to deliver a speech. Number one, in the do's list, tell a story. Story always stays in the mind of your audience. Trust me, if you speak for 50 minutes and you give a beautiful story for 2 minutes, 90% people will forget the 48 minutes you talked about, and they will remember the 2 minutes you gave the story. So always pick a story, a nice story, being you know, true or maybe a symbolic story. You don't have to tell a true story, not in the sense that you lie, but sometimes we tell symbolic stories. And when you tell a symbolic story, don't tell people that this is a true story. Tell them that this is a symbolic story. So there are stories that will always sums up your entire lecture. Meaning, you are talking for 50 minutes, but the story you tell would basically sums up your entire lecture. Let me give you a very simple example. So, this is a story. Obviously, it is a symbolic story. Why? Because you can tell from the content of the story it's not real. So a guy went for hiking. And as he was climbing the mountain, it was getting dark. And he lost his connection with people. And now it got too dark. And he started asking, he said, God, I need your help. Get me out of here. In the beginning, God told him, I'm not going to answer you. And he says, why? He says, because you never call me. You never know me. Only when you're in trouble, you're calling me. Therefore, I have nothing to do with you. He begged God, I'm sorry. Yes, I did not call on you before. I was very heedless. But please forgive me and accept my plea. So God says to him, what do you want? He says, save me. Save me. I need you to save me. God says to him, cut the rope. Cut the rope. He says, no, I'm not going to cut the rope. God says to him, it's up to you. God, save me. God told him, I told you, just cut the rope. He would not listen. And he keeps begging God to save him. For the third time, God tells him, cut the rope. And he would not. Then, the guy would not listen. He is still holding to the rope in the middle of the night, the middle of the dark, till he dies. Next day, it says in the news that a guy was found hiking, but dying, but only 2 feet above the ground. Only 2 feet above the ground. Now, what does this story tell you? What is the message this story is telling you? Huh?
Faith.
Faith and trust God. God is telling you cut the rope, but you're doubting God. Had he cut the rope, he would not have fallen that far, 2 feet only. Because it was dark, he would not see his way. The moral of the story is trust God, no matter what. That's the whole idea behind this story. Now I can deliver a speech for 50 minutes talking to you about trusting God, right? But this story of 2 minutes can sum up the entire idea. That if you trust God, God will not let you down. This guy did not trust God. He doubted God. Even though it's a symbolic story, it's not a real story because you cannot talk to God verbally. You can talk to God in your heart. But the point is, this story basically sums up your entire topic. So, telling the story. Number one, what is telling a story. Always tell a story. Whether true or symbolic, but always tell a story. Now, when you tell a story, you have to understand back to the dynamic. Remember, There are two ways to tell a story. Sometimes to tell a story, a simple story, without adding anything to it, keeping it so dry. But there is another way to tell a story, and I advise you to add spice and salt. In Arabic we say milh and baharat, right? Sayyid Hussein? Add spice and salt. What does that mean? Don't make it so untasty. You want to tell a story, put some emotion in it. Hajj Zainab says exaggerate a little bit. Exaggerate, but don't lie. There are two things. Lying and exaggerating are two different things. By adding spice and salt, you're not lying. Basically, you are elaborating. You are giving more meaning to your story. So, always add spice and salt. Let me give you another example. How you add spice and salt. So there is a verse in the Quran, in Surah Al-Ma'idah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the story of two brothers, Cain and Abel. وَاتْلُ عَلَيْهِمْ نَبَأَ ابْنَيْ آدَمَ وَاتْلُ عَلَيْهِمْ نَبَأَ ابْنَيْ آدَمَ بِالْحَقِّ إذ قربا قربانا فتقبل من أحدهما ولم يتقبل من الآخر قال لأقتلنك قال إنما يتقبل الله من المتقين. Tell them the story of two brothers of Adam's sons, where they offered two sacrifices, in which one was accepted, the other one was not accepted. So the one whose sacrifice was rejected told the other one that I shall kill you, and the other one replied by saying, God only accepts from those who are sincere or pious. So if I were to tell the story, I will tell this story with spice and salt, meaning I will draw a picture of two brothers. And this is all true. This is all true and derived from Islamic sources. Someone who is a symbol of generosity, selflessness, humility, piety, a man who was down to earth, dutiful toward his parents, and that is who? Habil or Cain. Abel. Abel in Hebrew or Aramaic and English, and Habil in Arabic. And the other one, a man of all evils, a savage, a jealous, envious, arrogant, selfish person, that is Cain, Qabil. And they are fighting, and they are jealous of each other. And remember that each person, according to his or her innate nature. You're good, you do good. You're bad, you do bad. That's how we act. So two brothers competing. One, and both wanted to offer sacrifices. One goes to his sheep, and he was a shepherd, Abel, and he picks the best one, the biggest one, the healthiest one, the most expensive. And the other one, Cain, would go to his worse corpse that he doesn't really need or does not utilize. And you know, some people, I have noticed this myself, that when they have something that they don't need, where do they take it? If they have something good, they keep it at home. But if they have something not so good, they take it to the Islamic center. As if they are doing a Hassan. He just wants to get rid of it, so he makes it like it's a Hassan. No. And the Quran, listen, the Quran is very smart about this. The Quran tells us that لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ, you will not achieve the highest level of piety حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ, till you spend that from that which you like, not you dislike. So Cain gives his worst, Abel gives his best, and Allah accepts one and he rejects the other one. And here is the battle start. And ever since this battle started between Abel and Cain, those two brothers, it never stopped throughout the history till today. There is always war between evil and good. So this is the story. You notice how much spice and salt I put into it. What I mean by salt and spice, you do not need to lie, but you basically, nor necessarily exaggerate, but you elaborate. You basically address it from all angles. So what time? We still have 10 more minutes. So you address it from all angles. Angles. So it would be as if the audience are visually watching the story. As if there was a movie, you can see, look, what does a movie do? Basically a movie, what's the difference between a movie and a book, a novel you read? Basically the movie would translate the emotions into actions, and you see it live. You see it live. That's why it's powerful. That's why they say one الصورة الواحدة تعادل ألف كلمة. One picture, one image is equivalent to what? 1,000 words. Why? Because the image is basically talking to all your senses and mobilizing all your senses. So you are basically, when you add spice and salt, you are tackling it from all angles, and you are engaging the audience, the listener, to be engaged. Number one, tell a story. Number two, give and use examples. When you are talking about any subject, you have to give examples. Without giving examples, you are leaving a huge, vacuum in the mind of your audience. There will be so much ambiguity. Let me give you an example. Someone may ask me why scholars, Muslim scholars, why they differ in their opinion. One says this is halal, one says it's haram. One says Tuesday is the Eid, the other one says Wednesday is the Eid. Why? Is it because of animosity they have? Is it because they hate each other? Is it because they don't stand each other? No, none of that. Simply because they think differently. They think differently. Just like you and your friend think differently. We all think differently. Now you will ask me, so I gave you now, so far I gave you logical answer, right? You ask me why scholars differ, and I answered by telling you that because they think differently, right? That's a logical answer. But is it enough for you to understand my point? No. It will not be enough till what? Till I give you an example. Let me give you an example. Let me give you an example. And I will give you more than one example. You go to a doctor, and your doctor tells you that take this problem you have could be solved by taking two tablets, two pills of Tylenol. and you will be okay. So he prescribes Tylenol for you. But if you go to another doctor, he says, don't touch Tylenol, don't touch Advil. Rather, do not eat anything that has, let's say, triggers your whatever in your body that contains dairy product. So you have two approaches. One that prescribes pills that contains chemicals, but then it gives you instant relief. Rather, another doctor who believes that your problem could be solved by taking a long-term approach, by avoiding anything dairy. So, two different approaches, two different way of thinking. One tells you take Tylenol, one tells you don't take the dairy product, because they think differently. That's how our scholars also differ. Let me give you a simple example from the Quran, how our scholars differ between themselves. Can I wipe this? Very simple example, because it's time for Salah. So, Quran says, وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا النِّسَاءَ حَتَّى Who reads Arabic among you? Who reads Arabic among you? Please, read this for me. Anybody else wants to try? Anybody reads Arabic? Sayyid Hussein? الصلاة لا النساء.
ولا تقربوا النساء حتى يطهرن.
Ahsan. Look, so those two gentlemen read this ayah in two different ways. The Quran says, do not touch women while they are in their monthly cycle till they become pure. That is the translation. Do not touch women till they become pure. Okay. Is that adhan?
Yes.
Still. Okay, we have to finish. I think we have to delay that till next week, because this is very important. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, we'll meet you next week bi-idhnillah.